Okay, it is 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm recording a review of Hear the Wind Sing, Murakami's first book, translated in this case by Ted Goossen, on the same day, although technically it is a new day, that Idea Net swallows. I went ahead and grabbed this because I had just purchased it when I moved to Japan. It was one of the few Murakami books that I did not bring along. I had to make a few sacrifices, and this was one of them. And I wanted to get the books that would fill out my collection again, and this was one of them. So I went ahead and chucked it on there to go ahead and read at a later date now that I've been kind of a Murakami Nosgard mindset. And again, much like South of the Border, Less of the Sun, I just kind of sat down, started reading, and once I got into it, that was it. I was hooked and finished the whole thing in one day. In terms of the plot summary, or actually, I want to give a bit of background first. Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973 are published in the West as one unit. I believe for the first time, Penguin is going to be releasing Pinball as a standalone, which curious that they start with that and not Hear the Wind Sing, but whatever. They're Murakami's first two novels, and a very interesting insight, because even Murakami himself, the reason that it took so long to get an English translation of these books is because Murakami would regularly block it, because to him, they're the books that he wrote at night, after work. He says about an hour per night. There's actually a preface in here by Murakami written in 2014 recounting how he got his start writing, and that he is, quotes, a little bit embarrassed by these books. But at least with regards to Hear the Wind Sing, it's really fascinating, because you don't often get an insight, I think, into these kinds of books. Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973, I can't speak to Pinball yet, but I'm going to guess it's pretty much the same thing, are the kind of books when an author starts out writing that almost always wouldn't get accepted, wouldn't get published. And it's really fascinating to see an author that went on to be so popular, so well-renowned, to see their first book and see all the, not really mistakes, but all these sort of amateurish writing then that they really would then go on to develop and refine. Because while you can see absolutely nuggets of what they would go on to hone in on and craft and really develop their unique style, at the same time you can see them experimenting with things, trying to find their voice. He mentions in here that he tried to write in using a pen and paper in Japanese, but that what he wrote ended up being sort of too pretentious and too literary. So he pulled out a typewriter and tried writing in English, and it was only by forcing himself to use a language that he wasn't very well versed in that he was able to hone in on a style of writing that really suited him. And then he went back and rewrote the first part of the novel in Japanese using this voice, and that's how he found his voice, which has led to the common misconception that he writes all his books in English first, which is not the case. Even this manuscript, he did not write entirely in English. He only wrote the first bit in English in order to discover that writing style. The really interesting thing of reading it again is, or alongside when you're looking at any artist's early work, is their own voice, but also this is the time when you can really read the inspirations. The Vonnegut vibes are unreal. He's got the very short chapters. In one chapter, he even gets a t-shirt from a radio contest, and it says the t-shirt looks like this, and it has a hand drawing of the shirt, which is straight out of Breakfast of Champions. And like Breakfast of Champions and Trout, you have a fictional sci-fi writer who is an inspiration for the narrator, who talks about writing, and it's implied as sort of writing their memoirs. So, well, not a stand-in for Murakami himself, this still shares a lot of similarities to Murakami. So again, this could damn near be Vonnegut fan fiction, as much as it is Murakami's starting point, because a lot of the things that Murakami would go on to be known for, his sort of magical realism and whatnot, are absent in the story. But at the same time, it ends up being, I think, a very unique story, something you would definitely not see many times. And like I said, it's really, really neat when you get to go back and see this. Like I said, this is the very first book that Murakami wrote. I wrote my very first novel in my the summer between high school and college. I wrote my first novel, and it is something that I'm absolutely ashamed of nowadays. And I never did submit it for publication or try to get it published or anything. I never would. But the idea that if that thing had ended up published and for other people to read so many years down the road is absolutely horrifying and embarrassing thought. So I feel for Murakami, but at the same time, it's a great thing to have. So in terms of actually getting into the plot, it follows the nameless protagonist who, while the nameless protagonist and his friend the rat are both featured again in Pinball and Sheep Chase and Dance Dance Dance, as I said in my Dance 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 review, details across the book and personalities across the book get the series, quote unquote, is called the Trilogy of the Rat, but they change every single time. Only sort of brief background details are consistent, like the rat coming from a wealthy background, the protagonist and the rat being friends, them coming from this town. But otherwise, in terms of the personalities that they exhibit and some of the finer details, you might as well just treat each one of them as their own standalone thing, and that's what I do. So it follows the nameless protagonist, and the rat, in about I think it's 17 days or something like that. The latter part of his summer vacation, he's home from college, and the sort of events that he gets up to during that time. It's a very slice of life book. So to whom would I recommend this book? This is definitely for either Murakami purists or somebody who's really a huge fan of Kurt Vonnegut. It's not even a matter of saying that, with South of the Border, West of the Sun, I said that I wouldn't recommend starting here because it's not a good representation of Murakami's work. The same thing applies here, but where South of the Border, West of the Sun is more Murakami writing something outside of his usual style, Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball, I'm sure, are going to be in a style. He hasn't yet developed a style. Like I said, his style is still very much reminiscent of the readers or the authors that he was reading at the time. So in that sense, if you're coming into this as a fan of Murakami and you're hoping to get more of them sweet Murakami vibes, then look anywhere else. But if you've already read all of Murakami, or like I said, you're a huge fan of Kurt Vonnegut, then give this a shot. I don't think it's by any stretch of the imagination a bad book. I actually really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed my time with it. It's short, it's sweet, it's fun. So there's that. So getting into the pros and the cons. The cons are that I don't think, because it's not developed, because it doesn't have the sort of maturity of a fully fledged author, there's a lot of amateurish things in terms of implying depth or suggesting depth, but not actually delivering on it, in the sense that I kind of want to save this for the analysis, but it's very much a slice of life story. So in that sense, there's a lot of things about it that are implied, and I think it does a good job, and I would call this a pro, that it captures a period of time very well, both a period of time in terms of Japan, but also a period of time in a person's life when they're in their 20s, when they're still figuring things out, when you make big mistakes, but you can still bounce back from them. It really is just a snapshot of life. And, in that can be a pro in the sense that it definitely captures the emotional vibe of that period of time, but it can also be a con in the sense that all the characters are kind of one-dimensional, and it doesn't really go into super detail about any of the themes so much as it just kind of touches on one thing and then moves and touches on something else. It gives kind of a kaleidoscope, a very broad rather than deep approach. So going back to the prose, funny. I think it's a humorous book. Early Murakami works, and I say early, but even up to Wind Up Bird Chronicle, could have a sense of humor about them that I think can get a bit lost in sort of the drama. I think Kafka also had some humor. I mean, for fuck's sake, Kafka was the one with Colonel Sanders. But, very much, it's got a nice tone to it. The rapid-fire pace keeps things fresh, keeps things talking. And, again, it's so short that nothing overstays its welcome. It gets in, it makes you laugh, it makes you feel a sort of vibe. It really captures that sense very well, and then it ends. And so, in the end, it like I said, the con is that there's just not a whole lot of depth to it. But to me, that's sort of offset by the fact that it's just not super long. You can sit down and finish it in an afternoon easily. It's just barely 100 pages even, and that's short paragraphs with long breaks in between for like chapters and whatnot. So it's actually much less. It's really a novella more than anything else. So getting into the sort of analyses, I mentioned it being a snapshot of this point in life, and there's two really big aspects that I want to delve into that when I talk about it being a snapshot. The first is the way that it sort of embodies that. I mentioned it being a time in your life where you're allowed to sort of make mistakes but still recover for them because you're still figuring things out. So you have the woman with 9 fingers who has had an abortion, and she's struggling through the trauma of that. You have the rat who is trying to escape his dad's wealth, the sort of wealth that he's born into, because coming from this age in Japan in particular, when the sort of counterculture was riding high, to be wealthy and to be against that was very much in vogue. So again, you have him fighting against that, and then you just kind of have the protagonist who is floating through life but clearly doesn't necessarily really have a strong grasp on anything. So it's that period in life where you're old enough to make mistakes. It's a coming of age story, but it's a college coming of age story rather than a sort of high school coming of age story. It's not about finding yourself in terms of the sort of teenage years. It's really, like I said, you're old enough to have made mistakes. You're old enough to have had sex, to have made abortions. You're looking at your future in terms of, I need to get a job and things like that. So it's a stage of a lot of uncertainty, but also a stage when you're young, you're healthy, and you can bounce back from failures. You can make big mistakes and still come out the other side okay and not sort of totally damaged forever. And I think it really just does a good job of capturing that style, that feeling, that time. And then the second side of it that I talk about in terms of it being a snapshot is, this is something that really would go on to be a focus of Murakami's work, is the emphasis on how things in the past are in the past and things in the future are in the future, in the sense that the protagonist has a girlfriend who committed suicide, and he's never able to understand why she did it. And there's a radio station that calls him up and says that a certain girl has dedicated a song to him, and he realizes that it's a girl he dated in high school, but he's trying to go back and find her to return a record that he had borrowed from her and lost. He goes out and buys a new copy of it for her, and he isn't able to contact her, isn't able to find her, tries a few things, but just is stonewalled every step of the way. And at the end of it, it mentions that he just kind of listens to the record alone. And at some point, it mentions that the photo of the girl who did go on to kill herself got lost in the shuffle. There's also the girl that with the 9 fingers that I mentioned, where he has this kind of connection with her. It could go romantic, but it's really more platonic, more of a being a person that she can talk to when she really needed to talk to somebody. And then they agree to meet next winter, and when he comes back during that vacation, it's to find that, and this is sort of in the epilogue, but it's to find that she is moved, and he never hears from her again either. So when I call it a snapshot of a period of time, it's not just what I was talking about earlier of encapsulating the time period and a moment in life, but also the fact that life is sort of continually progressing in the shadow of the past and things that we've lost, but also in the sort of presence of the future and the things that we will lose. And it's sort of a depressing... There is, like, I call it a funny book, and I think it is funny, but it's sort of blackly comic, not quite in the same way that Vonnegut is, but maybe in the same way as Vonnegut. I'll leave that up to somebody else to decide. But it's got a bleakness to it. The fictional science fiction writer begins with a quote from this fictional science fiction writer that says, there is no such thing as a perfect piece of writing, just as there's no such thing as perfect despair. And the final quote in the book, or the final line in the book, ends with the writer having killed himself, and the quote from Nietzsche was carved on his grave: "How can those who live in the light of day possibly comprehend the depths of night?" From Nietzsche. So there's an ennui to it all, that a sort of aimlessness that is also captured when I talk about a sort of snapshot in time. It's that sort of time is passing, but in terms of making the most of it, are these characters making the most of it, or are they just, kind of living their lives, wasting the best of their days? And I personally would argue that they're young, and that's part of being young, is having the energy to waste those days and the time to waste them. But I think that the book wants you to question that and wants you to think about that. So that's really my review of Hear the Wind Sing, because, like I said, it's so short. You can read it yourself. I kind of hesitate because I feel like there's a lot of things that you could get out of it just by sort of reading it again and picking out certain quotes and whatnot. I'm really reminded that Murakami, even from the very beginning, was an author who the majority of his work, or not the majority of his work, but the majority of his thematic depth, like he mentions in Killing Commendatore with Japanese paintings, it's in what isn't said. It's in sort of the use of the absence of space. So while this is certainly a fascinating book, it's, like I said, it's half Murakami, half Kurt Vonnegut. And it's all interesting, and it was really, really delightful to revisit it, because I haven't, since I've only read it the first time, and the first time I read it, I was just kind of like, yep, okay, that's Murakami's first book, and same with Pinball. So to revisit it and find it a delightfully refreshing read was unexpected. This is hopefully the last time that I record a fucking review at 1:30 in the morning, so have a good one, everybody.